Yeah, so first up, as you probably detected this morning, when I was coughing and sneezing my way through, I've got man flu, so I'll try not to cough and splutter all the way through, but if I seem even more incoherent than normal, that's why. So I think my talk works really well with Sue's one this morning. It's almost like we planned it, we didn't. But I think I'm going to try and ask some sort of bigger questions. It's good now. I don't have to come up with answers. I can just ask the questions. And I think some of what Sue was saying this morning kind of would be answers to some of those questions, I think. So I'm going to be talking about how we can think about robust models of higher education in a time of crisis. So we've talked about it quite a bit already today. I'm going to talk a bit about the online pivot, the COVID crisis, and really what that revealed about the robustness of higher education. And then I want to talk about that at systemic level, institutional level, and the course level, and sort of break it down that way. And think about the role of online teaching. And then I'm going to throw in some VLE thoughts, and I think you're in a really interesting position at the moment as you sort of come to rethink your platform and your approach to that, and then some conclusion and discussion, hopefully. So about me, that's slightly out of date, the bio I sent to Karina. I've now left the Open University after 30 years, so gun for hire. So I'm an emeritus prof in IET. As you said, I was the OU's first VLE director. That was back in 2003, 4. So like lots of the time, we didn't have one uniform system. We had lots of different bits all over the place. And it was my recommendation to adopt Moodle. And I was the chair of the Open programme. So our Open programme is the largest degree in the UK, and it's our multidisciplinary degree. So it means students can choose from over 250 different modules to combine into their own pathway. That's a very powerful thing for lots of students to construct the degree that they want to do. And I blog there, and you can find all my other bits and bobs on Linktree as well. So the aim of this session, I thought, would be to provoke some questions for us to ask of a new learning environment and a new setup with regards to kind of future scenarios and where we might be going. And so to think about this, I thought we'd go back to the year 2000. Incidentally, the last time I was in Galway was 2019 at the OER conference. We thought, oh, it'd be great, you know. And then we all know what happened after that, so it's good to be back here. So what became as the online pivot was when everyone shifted online. And I think UNESCO said at some point, something like over 90% of all education globally was online at some point. So suddenly online learning moved centre stage, and for those of you who are involved in online learning, you're instructional technologists or educational technologists, you suddenly found yourselves on the phone to the principal or the vice chancellor saying, we need to put everyone online immediately. So suddenly you were no longer tucked down the end of a corridor, you were kind of centre stage. What I thought was interesting around the time was it sort of really revealed a lot of ignorance about online education. And partly this was because in a kind of emergency situation, we did what was pretty normal, I think, and expectable, was to just stream lectures effectively. But lots of people thought that was online education. And as Karina said, I launched a course at the OU in 1999, which was very popular. And it was funny to be watching this again and going, oh God, it's 2020, and we still think that online education is streaming lectures. So there was lots of articles here, like I think this one was from Inside Higher Ed. They said the main reason why the distance learning revolution didn't replace traditional models is that online learning just isn't as good. Kind of categorical kind of dismissal of online learning. I think what this reveals is what I call it the lecture deficit model. So the lecture, the face-to-face lecture, like we're doing now, is kind of held as the kind of the pinnacle of all education, and everything else is kind of just down from that, and we're always trying to replicate that. And what that really reveals, I think, is a lack of alternative mental models, I think, people have for online learning. So I don't know if it was the same here in Ireland, but certainly in the UK, was that Gavin Williamson? We should change our education secretary on a weekly basis then. But so as soon as the pandemic was over, there's all this stuff about universities refuse to end online lessons as if it's some kind of like punishment or abuse of students. And like Williamson was saying, that they're going to fine universities if they don't go back to face-to-face. And all this kind of underlined the whole idea that face-to-face is the only way. It's like we got all that messiness out of the way, that online teaching we had to do in the pandemic, and now we can go back to face-to-face and pretend none of that ever happened. And that kind of seemed to be the message. So I think it's interesting to think, like, during that pandemic, what did it reveal about the fragility of the higher education system? I think it's interesting because I work at the Open University. I worked at the Open University, and you need to get used to putting that in the past tense. And we were largely unaffected. I mean, obviously, individual people were affected, and people were either ill, had to care for other people and stuff, and there was concerns, lots of that. But the OU structure wasn't really affected. In fact, we saw an increase in students during that time. So, and I think this is partly because of the problems here. So, during the pandemic, we saw that higher education is largely based on bringing people to one location. You may have different campuses, basically you're bringing all the people to one location. And there are these crunch points of typically exams, high stakes exams, which need to take place physically lots of times. And all aspects of education, if you break education down into different aspects, you've got lectures, you've got the library, you've got the labs, you've got the seminars, they're all co-located. So once you lost that primary location, you lost all the different aspects, so kind of everything fell apart. And it's also reliant on other fragile systems. So certainly in the UK, we had problems around A-levels when students couldn't sit their A-level exams, and they were given teacher marks rather. Then suddenly loads more people got A's and that than we were expecting, and the university didn't have place for them. So there was all this kind of fragility all around the system, which we hadn't really noticed before. And I think it's important to realise that it's not just the pandemic. There's, I think perma-crisis was the word of the year a few years ago. But there's lots of different types of crises and things that can have an impact on higher education. So if we have a cost of living crisis, as we've been going through recently in many places, students might not be able to afford textbooks, they might not be able to afford to live at a university, they may have to live at home. There are areas of conflict. I was doing some work with Ukrainian universities who, understandably suddenly couldn't bring people to their campus, and they were trying to learn how to do online education. It's like we had a meeting with the Ukrainian Ministry of Education, and it was scheduled for a Friday, and they said, "Oh, we can't meet on Friday, we've just been bombed." You think, yeah, that kind of puts stuff in perspective, doesn't it, when you're doing that kind of stuff. So we've been doing some work with them. Pollution and climate change. I did a talk to some educators in Iran recently, an e-learning session, and they said in some of their key cities during certain times of the year, the pollution gets so bad that they have to close their buildings down like for 2 to 3 days. So again, students can't get to campus. Perhaps more interesting and difficult to pin down is the change in nature of the student body. I think we still often think, or at least people operate with a kind of mental model of 18 to 22-year-olds full-time on campus, and that's all they're doing. They're just there to study. Lots of students have individual crises. I think Karina mentioned this morning issues around mental health and things, or it may just be that if they're carers and stuff and their childcare falls through. The student body has changed a lot, and what we used to call non-traditional students are now practically the majority. So that means I don't know what that means about being traditional or non-traditional. Students have caring responsibilities. Students have jobs to try and pay for their study. So if they need to do those things, if they can't get cover, or if they're going through a particular issue, then they may not be able to come to campus and study. Protests and political upheaval. Some of you may remember the Rhodes Must Fall protests in South Africa a few years ago, and I knew some people who worked at the University of Cape Town, and again, the campus would be closed for like days on end as students were protesting. Issues of globalization and bringing students over here and how that's affected, and we saw that particularly during the pandemic, how many universities were reliant on overseas students for income. And new technologies. So we've talked about AI a bit already today. I'm going to try not to talk about AI. I know it's there, but it does raise lots of questions about, what do we do and how does it impact upon our traditional model? So I think my kind of hypothesis here, my claim is that higher education needs to be more robust, and online is an important part of making it more robust. It's not the only part. It's not a sort of a solution. So I'm going to break that down to these three levels. And first of all, I think we need to think at the kind of systemic level of how we make all of higher education more robust. And if you were doing that, you might look for a robust system as a model. And so the internet was designed to be robust. That was the whole point of it. Well, you know, if it could survive a nuclear attack and you could still get communication around. And when they were devising the internet, they had these kind of key principles that it was open so that you could log onto it with any device. You didn't need special systems. As long as they used the protocols, you could log onto it. It was distributed, so you had different nodes all over the place. So you could log onto it at different places. And it was decentralized. There wasn't one sort of center point of weakness that could be taken out. So if someone was taken out, then it would just reroute through a different path and get the information to you separately. So the internet is a system that's designed to be robust. I think we can use it as a model for what we might want from higher education. So if you take those three factors, open was first. So just thinking about my experience with the OU, openness. So first of all, if you have open resources, you can remix these. And so we use a platform called OpenLearn where we give away a lot of our content. And I think the person was talking about MOOCs earlier, who was saying about the increase in traffic during the pandemic. We saw similar on OpenLearn, so our traffic went up by something like 500% during the pandemic. Partly that was just people coming to learn, but also I think it was a lot of academics and teachers coming to try and find content they could take and then reuse and share in their own courses. We are open entry at the Open University, so that means you don't have to have studied A-levels to come study with us. So that means we're not reliant on these other fragile systems where if they go down, then you're impacted. Open source, as I mentioned, we have Moodle or self-hosting. I'm a big fan of having your own domain. So that means you're not reliant on other systems you can use. So during the pandemic, I ran a number of drop-in sessions because suddenly lots of people want to know, how do we teach stuff online? What should we do? So like every week I would host a video chat and bring in some experts, and then anyone could just drop in and find out. So we do stuff around assessment, and we do stuff around teaching, models. And I could do that because I had my own blog. I didn't need to wait to go through kind of official sanctions. And open access, particularly in terms of publications. So during the pandemic, because libraries were closed, suddenly people needed to get access to digital textbooks. And perhaps unsurprisingly, lots of publishers saw this as a means to increase profits. And so there was a bit of price gouging that went on. And there's been a big e-textbook SOS campaign run in the UK. Whereas if you're open access, of course, you know that you're not reliant on those things. Distributed, so our model at the Open University is distributed. So we have part-time tutors, we call associate lecturers, and of course they're placed all over the place. So we don't need them to come to one location, they're all over the country. Similarly, our students are dispersed geographically. And our academics, although we used to go to Walton Hall in Milton Keynes largely, but they could work from home and could and work separately. And similarly, our support staff, we did have some support centres, but they were sent home with laptops, and they could do a lot of that work from home. So it wasn't a kind of a big impact of one place, that once the campus closed, it wasn't really that kind of taken out of the whole thing. Decentralised, I'm sort of interpreting this in some different ways. So first of all, decentralised in terms of the requirements of time. If we were playing a drinking game now, I would say every time I say asynchronous, you could take a drink, but we won't do that. But asynchronous is actually really important, I think. So all our study is not synchronous. So some bits are. We have tutorials, online tutorials now, but it's not based around the lecture model. So that means that students can study at their own pace. It's much more flexible, particularly during a time of crisis. Then a student may not be able to conform to a very strict timetable. Be like, I've got Monday, I can do stuff on Monday. Apart from that, I've got to do childcare or do those other things. People's lives are really impacted. So our study being asynchronous gave a lot of flexibility to our students. And it's also teams-based, so we weren't reliant, so we produce our modules in teams. So if one person was ill or couldn't take part, then it didn't mean the whole course would go down. So if you, at the kind of institutional level, I'll come on to emphasise this, but I just want to say that I'm not proposing that all universities become the Open University, just rather what are their bits from this that we might be able to take away and apply in other areas. So flexible systems, as I mentioned, I was the chair of the Open degree, so that allows you to construct your own pathway. I think that's really important because that allows people to change as circumstances change. As something's like, actually, I started doing history, but I'm not interested in that. But I can take these other bits, or my career interests have changed, and I want to adapt to what's going on. And also flexible as to timing. You mentioned students may not be able to always get to campus. We were talking about this over lunch, about whether students want to use lecture capture to catch up or do that. Timing as to attendance, I think some of you may have seen all these sort of headlines of empty classrooms because all the students are just using lecture capture to catch up. And one of the reactions to that is that we're going to make everybody turn up and fine them if they don't. And I think that may be privileging some students and disadvantaging others. So we may need to be flexible around attendance. But there may be something to say you really shouldn't be at this face-to-face. These ones are perhaps less important, you can do this hybrid, but these things you need to be face-to-face. And flexible systems as to assessment, whether that's what you will deem acceptable assessment or whether students can have choice in their assessment. I'll come on to assessment a bit later as well. And I think this is a really important part, and I'll probably reiterate this later as well. It's not just about the technology, but it's about all the systems that go around that technology. So it's no good saying, hey, we've got this wonderful technology, why is no one being innovative? If actually when you try to innovate, you get punished for it because you're getting poor student marks. So you need systems and tools that encourage staff to do all these things like adopt open resources rather than just create their own material, to try different forms of assessment, to experiment with online pedagogy. I'm often, it's not just my institution, I think I hear this from all over the place. Senior staff at universities are always like, we want innovation, and then you come and say, I want to innovate like this, and not like that. Fill out this 42-page request for why you want to innovate. So I think we kind of need the tools and cultures that encourage that. Asynchronous again. So at the course levels, thinking about an individual course, individual module. This is kind of open as to time, I think. So I sometimes think that asynchronous versus synchronous study is actually a more significant factor in course design than whether it's face-to-face versus online. So it completely changes the way you think about it. And I think this really gets back to the idea I was talking about of the lecture deficit model, that just replicated all the demands of the synchronous world. It's like, and that people couldn't think of having an asynchronous mode of teaching online. So when you're teaching and you use asynchronous modes, so people can come in, look at their resources and stuff, it allows you to make quite extensive use of lots of different material, VLE content, videos, blogs, etc. And it gives students a lot of flexibility around what they do. And also it gives a lot of student control. I think, I can't remember what session I was in this morning, but someone was saying that students like to go back and watch at their own pace, and particularly students for whom English might not be a first language can watch stuff at their own pace. And often it gives time to interact, and so with asynchronous discussion, you'll have people can really sort of think about their answers, and you might get different people interacting and coming up than you do face-to-face. And it also gives increased curriculum flexibility. So I mentioned that I was the chair of the Open Programme, and so we can combine 250 different modules, or students do combine 250 different modules to create their own pathway. And when I took it over, I thought, I bet there's probably about 4 or 5 pathways that everyone does. Oh no, they do all the pathways you could possibly imagine. And that's really because they want to be in control and they do all things. But the reason we can do that is because it's asynchronous study. It would be a logistical nightmare trying to imagine the timetable that would allow you to combine 250 different modules into your own pathway. So being asynchronous does give you some flexibility in different models. At the OU, we've got a learning design model, and we have 6 sort of categories of what students can be doing at any one time. That's handling information, assimilating information, communication, producing something, engaging in simulations, and experiential. I think if they're particularly if you're in business, drawing on experience. And that's just our model. It's like I'm not proposing that as the model, but it was interesting that I was part of that team that implemented that. We didn't have a kind of uniform approach before. And we often used to focus on the stuff, so we would sit down and say, okay, we've got a new module, we're going to have 10 printed units and 2 CD-ROMs, let's fill them up, kind of that, and that was sort of what we did. Probably a bit simplistic, but so it's made us think much more about how we want to teach something. So now you might have an activity, and you might think, well, I'll have a bit of a simulation, they're going to read something, and I want them to do some communication, and you end up with this kind of and we've got these nice tools that map it across that. There's a kind of general tendency to want to have a bit of variety across those different categories when you see the bar charts. And it was interesting when we retrospectively mapped existing courses. A lot of the people who produced them, good courses, thought they're quite varied, but you'd look at them and there'd be like 80% of simulation, and that was kind of quite shocking, I think, to lots of people. So I think having some model of learning design that you work to is important. And I think we don't appreciate that, but on campus with kind of face-to-face tutorials, we often have a kind of learning design model, but it's just predetermined. We're going to have so many lectures, so many seminars, and so many lab sessions, and that's going to set up and off you go. So we're kind of operating with this, if you like, innate learning design model that we've just never made explicit. We don't think of it as learning design, it's just, but I think that all goes back to this lecture deficit model. So we've kind of got this one so deeply embedded, we think that's what a module is. And when you go to online learning, you have to make all of those design decisions much more explicit, and learning design is the ideal way to do that. Bit of a pitch for reuse, so we've mentioned OER today as well already. So, try to make use of OER where you can. These are open licenses, reused, adapt your context, usually good quality. And I think a lot of the time with OER, you never quite find the thing you want. It's like, I find something, it's sort of what I want. But actually, if you can adapt around it, it allows people time to focus on them constructing the activity and the support you want to go around it, rather than just the content that explains the basic stuff. Assessment. So during the pandemic, there was this big shift to online exams, and lots of universities said they're going to stay there now. And these came in various formats, so you could be timed. It was a 3-hour exam, proctored, someone's watching you, open book, so you can just go away and look at what you want, closed book, those kind of things, or they could go on for like a week or 2 weeks, essentially. And at the OU, we had a mixture of these already, but lots of ones that used to have a face-to-face exam were forced to go online. And so they did some work and found that there was an increase in participation and performance across exams that were now made to go online. So we went, great, let's do online exams, that seems great. Then, of course, AI has come along and it's gone, oh, no, now people can really cheat at those type of exams, so that's no good. And again, I think the kind of simplistic answer is to go, well, let's all go back to face-to-face exams, that will solve it. But I think that's kind of slightly missing the point. And so, maybe the conclusion here is to try these kind of more internet native and open forms of assessment. And you probably know some of these. You can get students create their own open resources or assess contributions, discussion forums. I think co-creation of assessment is really interesting. I'm an external examiner at Warwick, and they run these interdisciplinary modules. So it might be a module about water, and that will cover, the sort of chemistry of water, its kind of cultural significance, town planning, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know if the people here who did the lobster thing, that was a kind of good interdisciplinary approach as well. But in those courses, students come up with their own assessments. So they'll say, you've got to do something then that demonstrate this. And students will discuss with the tutor and say, I'm going to do it like this. And the types of different assessment are amazing, because you get, some will be, a song, others will be a poem, others will be a presentation, others will be a poster. And I thought you're not going to be able to match across all those different formats kind of and be consistent, but actually you can. And I think you really can sort of find the different levels of performance. So I think, and that makes those things very difficult to cheat, of course, because they're like, they are individual to the student. So just thinking about the role of online. So it has some affordances, some good things about it. So you have a wider range of resources you can use. Asynchronous, so you can be asynchronous. You don't have to be, and I think a mix is good. It does open up the ability to be asynchronous more. Increased flexibility for what you want to offer and what media you want to offer. And for students, you can bring in different tools that are fun for students to play with, sort of stuff that Sue was talking about this morning. And it gives you a chance to rethink pedagogy. I did, on my blog, which you all avidly read, I did a thing a few months ago, like, what's the point of online technology, of educational technology? Well, and I didn't mean that rhetorically. Why do we use it? And I gave some options, like to increase flexibility, to improve performance and stuff. And one of them was to rethink pedagogy. And it wasn't the winner, but I think it came like second or third. So I think it's interesting, lots of people are like, it's actually useful just to stop and step back and go, okay, if I'm going to teach this online, what am I going to do differently? And it also allows you different forms of access, so people can access it from many different places. You probably know a lot of these. There are lots of myths about online learning. So students don't make social connections. They can and they do. You have to be much more explicit about it, I think, and you have to encourage it. I have this phrase that the architecture does the work. I think the architecture does the work on campus a lot because students will bump into each other in the cafe, or even when they're just hanging around outside the lecture room waiting to come in, they might be chatting. So it's all doing that work for you, whereas you have to explicitly construct that interaction. Other people say you can't do group work online. You can. It takes a lot longer. I had a colleague who joined the AU once, and he had a group work session that used to take an afternoon face-to-face. I was explaining to him it was going to take about 3 weeks to do online. And that's a really good example of where you do want to have some synchronous stuff. So if you have a synchronous session, that's really good for quick decision-making, like who's going to perform this role, who's going to do that, and then asynchronous is then really good for going away and doing some of the kind of discussion and researching and sharing that stuff back. It's cheaper. Sorry, Vice Chancellors, not really. It's lower quality, again, not necessarily. Is often in the top 10 of NSS scores. And students prefer face-to-face. Kind of. There was a bit of research out a few years ago, and you could find it under No Shit Sherlock. But it's kind of like students who go to face-to-face prefer face-to-face, and students who study online prefer studying online. And okay, but I guess that's part of the problem with the pandemic, is that students who wanted to study face-to-face were then sort of forced to study online. And there are problems around online learning, even when lots of things are balanced out, that online tends to have lower retention. Engagement is much more difficult to get. You need to kind of really explicitly build that in. As I've already said, you need to make activities much more explicit, lots of instructions about what to do next. And you are putting some of the onus back onto the students. Their home setup can be really influential here. So there's a certain kind of democratization effect about coming to a campus where everyone's got access to really good study spaces. Even if you've got a chaotic home life, you can go to the library and study. Whereas when you're doing online and distance education, the students are in their own spaces. So I think this sort of perhaps goes back to some of the stuff that Sue was saying this morning. I think we almost need to think of things like sliders. It's like we've got a face-to-face version or face-to-face, and we've got a fully online version. And at any one stage, you might want to push these sliders up and down, depending on those crises that might be coming. So it's all okay at the moment, but we're getting a cost of living crisis, we need to budge these up. And it may even be true at an individual level. So for students, they may need to be able to push these sliders up and down. So, we need systems that are going to develop asynchronous study, learning design, these blended approaches, varied assessment formats, and adaptability to context. So when things start changing, it's not a big shock. We know what we need to do. So I'm going to have some VLE thoughts. So, again, this is pretty obvious, but the technology does not exist in isolation. So you really need to think, if you're introducing new VLEs or any new technology, you think around the process around it, things like reward, like, do people get promotion for doing this stuff? Do they get recognized? Are there, fellowship awards, whatever. Is there the support that you need? Do they have the time to do it? What do you expect from them when they do it? So Sue already mentioned this. So, ILTA did a special issue a few years ago about the VLE Ireland project, and the editorial was basically just ripping me apart for my VLE is dead blog post in 2007. All right, I was wrong, okay? I accept it. But at the time, I was really into sort of Web 2.0 stuff. But I think it's interesting. So I've been doing a blog series recently called Things I Was Wrong About, only in educational technology, not kind of across my whole life. But and one of them was that the VLE is dead. So why did I want to be right? I wanted to be right because I thought these sort of like PLEs or like more flexible systems would allow you much more greater flexibility with the sort of tools you wanted to use. Students could use their own tools. And I thought it would promote much more innovation because I can do this, I can do that. It's like rather than just, here's the roadmap for the VLE, so everything looks the same. And I thought it would allow much more experimentation from educators in terms of pedagogy. I thought it would allow a sense of ownership, both from educators in that, these are the tools used and from students. So I was wrong because third-party tools, as Sue said, they didn't last. Oh, look, I went back and nearly all the tools I'd listed no longer exist, it's like Sue. And also, it's actually really complex to bring together all those different tools that you might want to use. And for students, that can get in the way of learning. I've suddenly got to construct all these tools myself. You just tell me what to do. Integrating those tools into university systems is really complex. And I think I kind of really underestimated the kind of inertia and momentum that an existing system has. Once the VLE is in, you can't get it out. It beds itself in. Partly because all these other systems build up around it. We build up support around it. We build up roadmaps around it. We build up structures and help desks and everything. And also because I think in higher education and generally, there's been a move to kind of more control. And we talked about this morning. Someone asked a question about GDPR and cyber attacks and those things. So I wonder if there's a way of combining those two things, why I wanted to be right and why I was wrong. And I think there's something around the kind of pedagogy and structures you want. So you want to have kind of flexibility, innovation, experimentation and ownership and in your structures. People want to kind of feel that they've got those things. But also you've got the kind of the IT side, the kind of serious side, where you need to have the longevity of these tools. That you don't want to be swapping around a tool every sort of 6 months, and people who understand the complexity of these systems and can integrate them into the very valuable sort of university backend systems, and will allow you that element of control, and so you can make sure you're not breaching GDPR and all those things. So, in conclusion, I think crises are part of higher education. We kind of just need to accept that, and that they come in different forms. I think higher education is going to need to be more flexible and robust to cope than it currently is. Online is part of that mix, it's not the only part. The VLE needs to work with systems, by which I mean the kind of like the human systems within a university or institution. I think the economics around this are quite difficult actually, because we're sort of set up for a face-to-face model often. And I mentioned things like learning design and teams-based. That requires quite a lot of input and quite a lot of resource, and you can be often trying to satisfy two essentially different economic models simultaneously. But I think we have to make a start, and I think you're in a good position at ATU. But I think lots of institutions, if the pandemic was to hit again tomorrow, I don't think they'd be any different to what they were back in 2020. I think that's a shame, really. So, some points for discussion that I thought we could throw out there. What would be useful in a new learning environment? What incentives would help, those kind of rewards and structures? What barriers exist that could be removed? Are there particular crises, particularly to your location or audience that you think could be impactful? a fun one, this. What were you wrong about, right? And again, we'll keep it to learning technology and things. And how might that affect your practice? It's fun to kind of, not just why I was wrong, but what can I learn from that about going forward? And that's it. That's a QR code. The first in my series of things I was wrong about was QR codes will never take off. So there's my slides there, and you can find those there. So thank you. I know. Who's going to use that?
And now we want them all the time, or we need them. So thank you so much, Martin. Do you have any questions from the floor, first of all? You're shy.
Any questions?
Might have a few online as well. Is there somebody over here? Well, I'll go first. And I'm just thinking as well about, the robust higher education system and the future of virtual learning environments. And I mentioned earlier, one of our tutor projects in digital transformation is we're working towards one VLE for the ATU.
Yeah.
So at the moment we have three instances we have two Moodle platforms, we have a Blackboard platform, we're all using Teams as well, and some are using other technologies that we've had within our own historical institutes of technology as well. It is positive in that we're moving towards Panopto, let's say, as our media. That's one big thing that's come through from Tutor and the investment, and certainly Turnitin. That's something that we've all committed to, that we're working towards, and it'll be embedded in our VLE. But just thinking about, we've a big road ahead of us, and we have a team working on our VLE integration project at present. And there's been lots of analysis around what's the best working model and what way to go forward. So thinking of us, we've 9 campuses. In some way, we have a lot of similarities to the Open University. We're widely dispersed. We have a base of 25,000 plus students now. 10,000, you could say, are flexible and online learners. And the rest, I suppose, are the traditional face-to-face students. And is there any lessons or something words of wisdom to say, what can we do or what road we need to take? Because I think obviously we're going down the road of one ATU, one VLE, virtual learning environment, but look at the audience that we have to cater for. And we're so regionally dispersed.
I think, I think you're doing the right thing to go down that road. I think that's the thing to do. And that allows you to centralise some resources. I would say, and that takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort, and that tends to just be a kind of real resource sink then. That'll just pull everything in. And I would say, even as you're starting to do that, you accept that for a certain period, that's going to be it in a way, because that's all you're going to have time to do. But be already thinking beyond that, not as in replacing it, but like, if we want to do different things, how are we going to incorporate those or allow people to do those? I think too many institutions, I think you was guilty of this also, just become so, I use this phrase called sediment. It's like you have this kind of VLE sediment, all this stuff builds up around it, and suddenly it's like a car that's kind of wedged in the mud. You can't pull it out, So you've got the kind of like the student support systems, you've got the resources, you've got the new models that are coming out and stuff. So it becomes really difficult to change, and that's fine. You can keep the system, but that just takes everything. So you never kind of look into what's coming next and how you can integrate that and how you can do those. So I think always have, at least one eye sort of over the horizon, as it were. So it doesn't become just solely focused on the VLE.
Yeah, and that's something I think we're thinking about as well. And the AI, how AI is going to form part of that, and how that'll be built into our virtual learning environment. Now, I know we have some of the colleagues from the team, and I don't know, do they have specific questions? Maybe you want to tell them about the ecosystem idea, Jamie?
Thanks. So it probably actually leads into slightly what you were talking about there yourself. You see now, whenever you're looking in the other institutes that have done this in the past compared to you're starting to go through it, there's two very different approaches. You've got your VLE focused one, and then you've got your more holistic, full learning ecosystem review. So then when you're starting to branch into more of how your VLE isn't just the sole focus, it's only one part, and how that interlinks. And then I suppose the question then would be, if you were to do it yourself, which one would you go with?
That one, the more ecosystem, much like Sue's kind of hub model. You know, it's part of a model, but there are bits, and I think it's like as you sort of go out, there's kind of like bits that are more robust and sturdy, and sort of maybe as you go out, they get flakier towards the edges, maybe, but maybe a bit more fun as well. I think because it's important that you do that stuff, otherwise you just get so locked in. I think.
I would say too that what we're starting to see and potentially look into is not just the case of, because as you highlighted there, the bigger you make it, the more resource intensive it's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's trying to look and develop sometimes the processes and putting those in place to try and put the culture in place. So over time you can slowly still get there. And as you said, is keeping the eye to the future instead of just where you are right now.
Yeah, keeping that culture of like allowing some experimentation and stuff is really important, I think.
Very good. Sean, a question at the back.
Well, it's a question. I know at the start you said the whole idea of the internet was decentralization and making things more robust, but one would wonder, has higher education, but also the health system actually made the internet, in fact, a huge point of weakness where, we were supposed to be more robust because now we can go online, but our colleagues across the river in the University of Galway, their VLE went down, they were cyber hacked. And our colleagues in MTU were cyber hacked. Yeah. And there were lecturers who were going in and say they didn't have their notes, they didn't have the resources for the students, they didn't have them printed out. They were almost more vulnerable as a result of the...
Yes, I think you're right. There's you're putting a reliance on another system. So I think I was trying to use the internet, although I was talking about online education, but also just the internet as a model for robust design, and which I think you can take kind of more metaphorically to be about
characteristics of it.
Yeah, distributed people and everything. But you're absolutely right. You open yourself up to a whole new range of things. It's interesting. I think that in Sue's talk, someone was asking about GDPR and how we become more controlled. I think that's a really interesting question because I did some research with students on the Open program recently. We were asking them about the use of social media and stuff, and they say, we all use WhatsApp, but like in the OU, we had an email round from IT saying, do not use WhatsApp. It contravenes our policies. It's don't even look at it. And so then we had some of our tutors telling students like, don't use WhatsApp. And the students like, this is really great. If I want to get an answer, we just go to the WhatsApp group. And I think there's an interesting tension there. That is about when I was trying to get that dialogue between the pedagogy and systems and the IT. And that's not to criticise IT. They're sort of making a decision from a particular perspective. But I bet there's no one we need people in the room when we're making those decisions who are also looking at things like student community. How does this affect student community? So I think that those kind of decisions need to be seen as much more multidisciplinary decisions and teams, I think, rather than just pure IT work.
Yeah. Very good. Any other questions?
Well, thank you so much. It was, I have one last question, maybe just one question. It was brilliant speech. I was just thinking about what you suggest, what should be the metrics should use to evaluate, to measure the success of some of those models that you mentioned, or some of the models let's say for assessment or for academic integrity, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because for lots of traditional higher education, academia, we've got metrics we understand. For promotion, you have an H index or whatever. You publish so many articles in respected journals and stuff, or we know that you've got a certain student satisfaction. And actually, a lot of those things speak to being quite conservative, because if you innovate in courses and in pedagogy, sometimes it doesn't work. That's kind of what innovation means. And so you might not get good student feedback in those modules, but it might be the second time around it really works, or it allows you to kind of develop a model. So so in some ways, a lot of those existing metrics prohibit or sort of go against innovation and experimentation.
And I think we could come up with new metrics, but maybe we just need to kind of trust ourselves. This looks good, you know, it's like you make a case for it and why it's interesting in there. And I think Sue made some good points this morning. The thing I really liked about Sue talk was how much you involve the students. I think we often don't do that. It's like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to experiment with this kind of pedagogy, because I think it'll be good for you to learn this way. You know, I think you also set up student expectations that not every course is exactly the same. We're going to try this. You may hate it, but I think that afterwards you'll think it's really great. You know, it's like, so sometimes students don't like something at the start, but they see the value of it afterwards. But I think involving them in that discussion can be really valuable.
Great, thank you. Was there another question this side? No? I was very interested in your slides, Martin, the set of slides. They're a lovely set of images. AI, but then you're interested in the dogs in particular and robots. You typed in your interests, I suppose, there's some great shots.
Isn't there like a new profession, which is to be a prompt engineer?
Yeah.
Someone's really good at writing prompts for AI, so
yeah.
I want something that conveys this.
yeah, no, it's brilliant. So I will say thank you so much, and a round of applause for Martin. Thank you. Thanks very much, Martin.